Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Master Instructor Roundtable with myself, Wendy Batts, and friend and co-host, Dr. Marty Miller. Marty, how are you today?
I'm good, Wendy. I'm out in your old hometown out here in Phoenix, Arizona. So, your old stomping grounds.
Yes, love it there and miss it, but I love it when we come to, because you're right by headquarters too. So I love it when we get to go and visit with our friends and family at NASM. But today's topic is one of the topics we don't talk about as often because we really focus a lot of it when we're dealing with the performance enhancement specialist, so our PES material. But it's one of those phases that's extremely important, especially if you want to be able to train and work with professional athletes or individuals that need to be what we call high performance athletes, even if they're not a pro. So I think this week's topic hopefully will kind of answer some of those questions that we've been getting when we're talking about phase 6, what used to be phase 7. And it should be a good time.
Yeah. And I love this topic because we always say everyone's an athlete. Everyone needs to train to the level of power that they can control. Sometimes we are asked, well, I can't put people in power phase. Yes, you can. And some of these techniques won't be for everybody, but just as we go through, even if we're talking about advanced techniques, think about bringing people along that journey as best they can to do some type of power training, because when it's looked at from muscular endurance, muscular strength, or muscular power, people lose power the fastest if it's not trained.
Absolutely. And so we're going to have to look at too. Think about modifications. I think that's also important, Marty, when you were talking about the acute variables, because even when you're working with seniors or what we're calling now active older adults, there are times where they need to have max power. And you'll see as we go through some of these slides, we're going to really be focusing a lot on the athletes. But to your point, Marty, everyone is an athlete. So maybe this is something that if you haven't been thinking about what comes after phase 5, you might want to look into it if it is appropriate, of course, for your client.
Love it.
So today, what are we going to talk about? We're actually going to give a very quick, as always, overview of the OPT model. Again, we're going to talk about how it was 7 phases, and then now that it's broken into CES 1 through 5 and the PES. We're going to talk about maximal power training. Of course, that's the focus for today. And we're going to discuss proper progressions. And then at the very end of this, we provided a program example of how we may design a program for someone that would be relevant for an individual in this phase of training. So you could see how we would look at it from our lens. And of course, we are live. So if you guys have any questions throughout our webinar or podcast today, please be sure to put it in the comments box, and we will try to get to your questions before the end of our show.
So, of course, Wendy, we're going to talk about the OPT model. So let's get that out of the way first. The history of the OPT model. So Wendy and I are old timers, or we've been around for a long time. So when we first learned it, we learned 7 phases. So the CES was phase 1, and then our max power phase was phase 7. We've taken those 2 and made them their own credentials because there's so much information. So you've got your corrective exercise specialist and your performance enhancement specialist. But we still want to talk about that bridge in the middle, which is that transition. So from moving well to moving well under load to moving well at high speed. So that way, that's the beauty of the OPT model. So it was a 7 phase, and it still is in my mind 7 phases. It's just, you got to get those first 5 phases down. Then you can hyper focus on correctives and then hyper focus on the elite power type of output. And then you have that full continuum that we both were taught early on. So it's a very successful model. It's been tested over the last 20 plus years, evidence-based approach, and it works for a very wide range of clients with all types of different needs and goals, which some of them include weight loss, improved health, increase in strength, muscle mass, as well as athletic performance. And Wendy, you said it so well at the very beginning. More and more people are now coming in the gym for a performance-based model compared to more that bodybuilding type of workout only back in the day, or strictly weight loss.
Well, absolutely. And I think, especially with the popularity of some of the HIIT workouts and boot camps, I mean, does this fit in that level of phase 6? We're calling it phase 6 because that's even what we call it when we're talking in the PES material. So it is no longer phase 7. It's because the CES was removed. So when we're looking at 1 through 6, 6 would be our max power. And when we say max power, again, we're maximal power, the training, that's what we're talking about. But just for short, we'll call it max power, just for clarification. And I think it's important too to realize there is a time and place. And as we go through this, you're going to see the importance of undulating, because it is, when we say max power, it is 100% of what you have on a power level. So keep that in mind as we go through it. But I agree with you, Marty. I think it's important to think about the spectrum of what the model itself does for someone that has either never been in the gym, someone that's been sedentary for many years, someone that maybe is coming out of some kind of rehab and, post-op and has been cleared for exercise. This model can be used with that individual and taking them up to that level, again, if it's appropriate. But it's one of the reasons why I love it. It's because it really is made for everybody.
Yeah. And when I always talk about my 3 rules of fitness, and the last one's have fun. Power's fun for sure, right? Other parts can be fun, but who doesn't want to slam things? Or if you blend in like the martial arts side of things that I do with punching or kicking, that's the kind of explosive stuff that people like to do. Of course, it's got to be appropriate, but it does burn those calories. People need personal trainers to guide them through these type of activities to keep it safe and progressive. But this is kind of, that one phase where people are like, all right, today's that day. I'm going to, explode, slam something, do whatever it takes, but you'll see great results.
So the focus when we're talking about maximal power training, we're thinking about high velocity training to maximize power, hence the name, max power. So this is accomplished by training with 30 to 40% of athletes max strength and by accelerating through their entire range of motion. So that is one of the things that I think is really important. When we say the entire range of motion, that shows the importance of the corrective exercise specialization, the importance of the assessment, to know where dysfunction may lie, and then what we can do to optimize the kinetic chain and the body and the joints moving to their full capacity. So when we get somewhere or get them up to phase 6, they are able to have the highest amount of force and speed and velocity and everything to their maximum capacity, because we were not worried about lack of range of motion or compensation patterns that could, with that type of force and strength being applied, lead to injury. So keep that in mind. And then, these athletes that do require the max power, they have, again, I can't stress this, successfully developed stabilization strength and eccentric strength. So the importance, again, of thinking about the acute variables and why, when Marty and I stress, please in phase 1, do a 4-2-1 tempo, which means, come up for 1 on the concentric side, pause for 2, and then slowly come down for 4 seconds. We teach our body how to decelerate. We teach how to move in all 3 planes of motion. So therefore, again, when we're speeding things up or adding more load or doing it all together, we know that we're providing the most out of what we have available, which should be our highest potential.
Right. And, back in the day when we did so many live workshops, a phrase that, I've heard you use, and I know I used, was you can't fire a cannon from a canoe, right? If you're not stable, you will not produce as much force. You're only as powerful as you are stable. And going back to that range of motion, if you limit your range of motion, you are absolutely limiting the time to accelerate an object, whether that is a limb, whether that's an implement. So that's why all of these details truly matter when it comes to elite sports performance.
100%.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, we always know when people walk into the gym, Marty, you can recognize this as well. So here's my story. You walk into the gym, someone hasn't been in there for a long time. What are they going to do? They're going to hit, and I'm going to pick on men, but they're going to go to the barbell chest, the bench and the barbell, and they're going to load it. They're going to do some chest presses. They're going to do maybe some barbell back rows. They're going to do traditional strength exercises because that's what they know. Again, they're not worried about acute variables. They're not worrying about tempo. They're just doing however many they can until they feel fatigue, and then they stop. They'll take a 5 or 10 minute break, talking to people, having some water, and then coming back and maybe doing set 2. When we think about an athlete, and Marty, you've trained athletes, I've trained athletes, it's very important to think about being able to have a purpose for everything that you do. So traditional training, that's not going to be able to express the speed and strength the way that we need them to maximize power. So when we're thinking about max power training, we're focusing mainly on the power exercise performed at the highest intensities possible. So when you look at the book, and you've gotten emails about this, Marty, I know that I have. I think it's important to think, they'll say, well, there's no core and balance and plyo. These are optional. And you've always talked about the importance of preparing the body. And I'm going to say this, I still do. That's my choice with my athletes, because I want to make sure and ensure that we've got the right muscles firing at the right time. But it's just one of those things that I do with my clients and athletes. And so when you're looking at what the purpose of this is, so remember, maximal power training, when we look at the title, that's the goal of what your client should achieve in that phase of training. So they already have their core should be dialed in. We know that there's intervertebral stability. We know there's global muscles that are working to protect the spine. We know that our balance is locked in. We know that when we're doing plyometric, that the time spent on the ground, so the amortization phase is minimized. We know all of this already, or they wouldn't be in this phase of training. So I prefer to do it as part of my warm-up, as you know. But most of these, when you're looking at the exercise selections that would be appropriate for this phase, they're going to be kind of considered more of your dynamic warm-up because they have the full available range of motion already.
Yeah, without question. And for those of you just joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable, Marty Miller here with co-host, dear friend Wendy Batts. We are talking about max power training. It's so critical, so important to understand how the whole OPT model, starting from corrective exercise all the way through the OPT, going into our PES type of techniques, builds towards this. And Wendy, tonight is the NFL draft. I will be watching because my Buffalo Bills are going to score a steal in the first round. But I do have a lot of friends that train these type of athletes, and it's not max strength. Now, do they put them through a max strength phase? Of course, but they're using that to then apply that force as quickly and rapidly as possible. And I can promise you, the strongest athlete on any team sometimes or frequently is generally not the most powerful, because it takes them too long to express that force, right? So a lot of the guys and gals in the teams that are more powerful have high levels of strength, but it's truly, can they elicit that output rapidly? And when you look at 40 times or whatever you want to do, they're all about the same top end speed, but it's who can get that quicker with one less step, right? It looks like there's a gap in their speed. It's not really the top end speed. It's the expression of force that got them to that top end speed at the fastest rate. So that is critically important. And that can make you if you're watching the NFL draft tonight, the people that get picked in the first round, because of that expression of force, sometimes that little bit of difference could earn them millions of dollars on potential from a few tenths of a second.
And that's why the combines are so important. And that's why everybody wants to be in it. And if somebody thinks that they have a chance and they're going through the draft and they're going through the combines, as a trainer, it is very important for us, again, to maximize that. How can we recruit all the muscles as fast as possible to either be explosive when we're running, being able to work on the vertical when they need to? Can they land correctly? Because again, now we're seeing more and more people looking at form, what's happening to their feet, what's happening to their knees, how coordinated are they doing different movements? Can they run their routes, whatever position they're trying out for? So all of that stuff is important. And that's one of the things here. Traditional training is very important for strength. And as you know, we work on that when you're looking at the model and muscular development. But prior to that, we spent time in phase 1 really working on stabilization. When we got into the superset, we're now combining stabilization and strength. 3, we're just working on strength. Then we're working maximal strength. And then we're working, when you're thinking about power, that's the superset in phase 5. So when you're looking at the power, we're 85 to 100% of their 1 rep max. We know that we've already got that. Traditional training is what people know, but now how explosive can you be on top of that as well? We know that we've got the strength, but if you also can't control that at a higher speed, then what good are you in that position truly? And are you maximizing your potential to be able to be even more of a better player, because now you're combining the two?
Great points, Wendy.
Thanks, man.
So maximal power, what's the goal? So the program design focuses on increasing velocity, everything we were talking about there. And if you look at the picture here on the right, shocking. You see triple extension on this individual's left leg, triple flexion on the right leg. Guess what? We start teaching that in phase 1, whether it's a step up to balance, whether it's a prone cobra. This is why we do what we do, because these are movement patterns that you have to be able to isolate and truly be able to lock them in. Then you integrate them, then you move under load, then you move them at high speed. This isn't the first time this person's ever been there when you're trying to do it explosively. So generally he stays in phase of training for 4-week duration before cycling back through phases 1 and 2. There's some variability there, of course, depending if it's in season or off season. And then ideally complete phases 1 through 6 without interruption. That's the linear periodization. 6 months of uninterrupted training, especially if somebody's new. That won't always work in every situation. Athletes off seasons aren't 6 months long. So that's where you have to be creative and undulate the program. And we've talked about this before with our golfers, and same thing here with if we're looking at football, since that's top of mind today, is during the season, you may not do as much power training because they're sprinting and running and jumping and all that. So, we can maybe come back with some other programming on this later for another podcast, Wendy, but you're trying to build a foundation early, getting them through the steps, taking that 6 months, then you begin to undulate the training program. So you have to focus on timing, whether it's timing of the year, timing within a season, right? What's tomorrow going to be? If that's competition, you're not going to do your max power training. You got to have time to recover. And then middle of the week, you might do your max power training if it's a very easy schedule like football. And then, as I said, you got to consider what they're doing. And it got down to the point when I was in professional baseball with the Yankees, who's my starter, who's my reserve, right? Those workouts will not look the same because the reserve, I have to work them harder to keep them in shape for playing shape. With a starter who's playing 8, 10, 12 days in a row, I have to unload them and work on different things because, they're highly conditioned, but they might be overtraining. So this is the beauty of and fun of it when you get to that level, working with those type of athletes.
Yes. And then working with other coaches, because obviously we've talked a lot about football. We're talking, I talk a lot about basketball. You've got a bunch of different coaches. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and you guys all have to be working on that same recipe in order to get the result that you want, which is hopefully having a very good meal. With an athlete, it's that important as well. Do they have the mobility? Do they have the stability? Are they strong enough to perform it? And then can they maximize that? And I think, Marty, that's when we're looking at undulated training, and you talked about athlete schedule, it's important to say in season, off season, like you said, positional players, but then also too, realizing that phases 1 and 2, to me, especially with an athlete, are probably more critical than 5 and 6, because they already know how to do their sport. They know how to run. I'm going to maximize truly how fast they can probably go by ensuring that they have good triple flexion, triple extension, good glute activation, and making sure that the right muscles are firing at the right time. So keeping all of that in mind too, this is a very specialized phase. And that's what I always want to stress to people. This is great for kids. It's great for anyone, but it needs to make sense. And even though we can play around with the acute variables and maybe not do something 100%, if you really want to get maximal power, you really want to try to do that to get them to 100%. So as you're going through this and you're thinking about your clients, or if this wants to, you want this to be your niche, you want to do some research and start studying what would make a good program and have a very solid rationale to why. So when you approach these teams or approach these ATs or trainers, you are already locked in on what you think would be the best to help them with their players to keep them healthy.
Yeah, without a doubt. And then if you're training the general population, this is just a fun way to work out for sure, which is great. Good for group training as well. Mm-hmm. So when we get to the acute variables, this is, I'm going to use your analogy, Wendy, about too many cooks in the kitchen. This is the recipe. So I cannot beg you enough to focus on these, because this is what makes the meal. So I'm going to go back to my 90s days with friends when she tried to make a truffle or a trifle and put meat in it, right? If you have the wrong ingredient, maybe Joe, you'll like it, but no one else will. So you got to have the right ingredients. So if I was to walk into a kitchen and tried to cook, I'm not grabbing ingredients. I'm grabbing the recipe book, because if I follow these instructions, even if I have no training in cooking, you will have a decent to good outcome. Then from expertise and years of continuing education and working with people, you'll get even better at putting together these programs. But the acute variables make it all come together, right? If you don't have the right repetition range, you're not hitting the right muscle fiber type. If you don't have the right time under tension, you're not eliciting the right physiological change. If the rest interval's off, you're not going to get the metabolic changes that you're looking for, volume, etc. So this is why it's so important. And these are the ego crushers, especially when you're working with somebody who's worked out before. So that's the whole psychological part of training people with these acute variables, because whatever they did before weight-wise, they're not going to be doing it, which is great, because I always say, only my eyeballs know what the weight stack says or the dumbbells say. The muscle fibers think you're actually lifting heavier loads because of the fatigue you're eliciting. And that's where people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then maybe, they're willing to kind of check their ego a little bit, because when you explain it, the muscle thinks you're working harder because you're following these acute variables. Then the light bulb moment goes off. But this is the science of training is easier to learn than the art of training. Wendy and I've talked about this before. So you can see right through here, and then I'll turn over to you, Wendy, that, we've listed everything. This is in all your resources, but I'm going to encourage you, whether it's your flexibility, your core, your balance, your plyos, the SAQ, and then the resistance, this is absolutely your roadmap to success.
No, I mean, I can't argue with you there. The numbers are there. The research behind it is there. Because I said it in the beginning, why core, balance, and plyo is NA. You don't have to. You can choose to do whatever you want. But if you think about what you're doing in the resistance side of it, a lot of that is going to mimic what you're doing in the resistance portion. So you also want to think too, you don't want to keep working those same muscles in the same pattern. We don't want to have all these repetitive movements at the highest maximal speed or explosiveness that they possibly can, because then we're not maximizing what we're trying to do in resistance. So you want to be smart in your choices. You want to make sure that you're doing things the right way, but just keep that in mind. That's why it's there. But it's very, very important that you properly warm up your client before you start doing some of these in the resistance part. Especially if they haven't been foam rolling and they haven't done a dynamic warm up. Strongly suggest that happens first, and then you can make your choices from there.
Great points, Wendy.
And then recovery, of course.
Without a doubt. So then we've got our maximal power progressions here. So once again, you can see the weekly progressions. And Wendy explained about what the NA, not applicable. Are we doing core with every single client? Absolutely. It just doesn't have to be isolated core all the time when you get to this phase of training. So then with your balance and step up. So, follow these acute variables, make sure that you're dialed in and that you're not skipping a step. If you choose not to do something, you should be able to answer the question, why? So if Wendy and I were sitting there and you're like, well, I'm not putting core in, it's not period, it's comma, because, and you can answer that question. So speed, agility, quickness, Wendy has done a great job on previous podcast talking about the value of it and why it's so important. And then resistance training here, you can see here how it progresses. Week 1, you're doing 3 sets, then you move into 4 for 2 weeks, and then 5. And then the reps 10, 10, 8, and 8. So if the reps are going up, guess what? The load is then, if the reps are going down, that means the load is going up. So the intensity is still there, 5% of body weight. And then towards the end, you can creep it up 8 to 10. And we max out at 10% of body weight. And the reason is it's not how much weight you can move. You have to have that expression of force and speed. So research shows if you start to get too much weight, the speed component is going down. And when you look at the force velocity curve, there's an ideal range where you have load and max speed, and that's your max power. If you have load and less speed, or more speed and less load, you're not going to hit max power. So all the thinking's been done for you. All the science is there. You can definitely go back and check it out. But that's why you see these progressions the way they are.
And I think that's what's really hard to understand is we're now telling you take the strength component really out of it. Now we want to try to maximize that movement pattern, Marty, which is exactly what you were saying, talking about that bell curve. If you're just focused on lifting really heavy and then adding a speed component, then you need to stay in phase 5. This is a completely different, because it's a different goal. It's a different patterning that you're working on. So that's why undulating your program is also important, because to maximize power, we also want to make sure that when we're in phase 5, we're maximizing the strength component and the superset followed by the power exercise that's mimicking that. Now what we're doing is taking all of that and then explosively, as hard, as fast as you possibly can control, of course. That control should be way more than it was, months prior when you just began doing that. When we say, hey, move as fast as you can control, like in a phase 3. Now that we're in phase 6, this is going to be something where you should barely be on that ground for a long period of time, because your body's able to control that landing and excel forward. Or when you're going into a linear pattern, you're being able to turn your legs faster. You're able to use those muscles to push off faster. So keeping all of that in mind, I think it's important to realize that, think about the importance of the goal, because oftentimes people will be like in all these heavy weighted vests and they're trying to do max power. Well, to your point, Marty, don't load it. Now, don't load it, explode it. So that sounds really weird, but and if you're just joining us today on the Master Instructor Roundtable with myself, Wendy Batts, and Marty Miller, we're talking about max power. We're talking about phase 6 and the differences between all the other phases, and how you really can use this with your athletes, or you should be using it with your athletes, but you can be using it with clients when it makes sense. And we're just talking about all the little nuances that make this phase so special.
Right. So now when we get into cycling phases, we want to look at avoiding overtraining. That's very easy to do when you're doing max power. Better is better, not more, right? Sometimes you get diminishing returns, fatigue sets in, you're losing your velocity. That's when you're cutting things. So as you cycle through a period of active recovery, CES and phase 1 are great. So if I just did my 4 weeks of max power, I'm not going to not train. I'm going to do my correctives, make sure everything's rebalanced, hit those stabilization, endurance type of muscles, keep those movement patterns ingrained, but I'm slowing everything down, dialing back in the ability to stabilize, and it prevents overtraining. So a phenomenal way to unload for a week to 2 weeks before you go into another phase. And then within the undulating training athlete schedule, important to focus on timing of the sport and training. So football is a perfect example. If you're an NFL player, you got your game on Sunday, you're not crushing it on Friday and Saturday. That's going to be that Tuesday or Wednesday, right? After a game on Sunday into Monday, it's going to be pure recovery. Tuesday could be maybe this phase 1 with CES, and then Wednesday could be your or the old school SET, strength endurance, or our max power. You got a couple days before your competition, and then you roll back into competition. So logic has to prevail, cutting your sets, cutting the volume, maybe distributing it out over a longer period of time compared to the off season.
Well done. And here's an example of a program. And I know it might be hard to see when you're looking, basically on our screen. If you're listening to us in the car, we were just trying to show you how you can easily blend this into what you're already doing. So you're going to see that when you're in phase 6, that it's telling you to do some sort of dynamic warm up. And that is super important. So you're always going to start with your foam rolling, you're down regulating any overactivity that you have. But there are times where I feel, and again, this is an example of a program that I've actually done, but I feel it's important to add a couple static stretches first, mainly, especially if I'm going to be having people jump or do some explosive things, which is basically the entire workout. I may start with the calves. I'm going to work on opening up the hip flexors, but then I'm immediately going to either do some active stretching right after that, and then going into my exercises, which are my dynamic warm-ups, because I am just ensuring that I've got good range of motion. I'm thinking about reciprocal inhibition during the active stretching that I'm doing. I'm putting it all together in my dynamic warm-up. So doing things like the walking lunges, or you can see here a plyo type push-up. These are just some examples that you could think about using and programming, but don't get freaked out because I have static stretching there. I had a purpose for that, because I know these are muscles that are very overactive with this particular client. So as you guys have heard, I always do lateral tube walking and bridging. Oh, but Wendy, that's a phase 3. Or phase 1. How dare you? Why would you do that? Well, because again, I just opened up their hips. I want to ensure that I am making sure the glutes are activated. I want to maximize my ability to help them maximize their ability in the resistance portion. So by doing something along those lines, and then the lateral tube walking, I personally think that that is really good, just to ensure that the hips are activated and ready to go. So when I maximize what you see here, in the resistance portion, you're going to see everything is with med balls. And then I do leg circuits. You have probably heard me talk about leg circuits everywhere. It's on social media. We did it on NASM Performance. If you're not part of Instagram, you should watch that. It was just in an article on Coach Magazine about why do I do leg circuits? Guys, you have to maximize and be explosive in order to get those muscles to be doing what I want them to do and have the outcome I want them to have. But they've got to be ready for that type of training and phase. So this is just an example, but I did want you to see this is something that I would truly do with an athlete when they were ready. And you can see how when we talk about being creative and thinking about what's best for your client, it's okay to mix and match certain things, but you better believe I have a rationale as to why I put that in there. So I was waiting for somebody to say something and they didn't.
Yeah, as we move on, past the program, I think the key takeaway is you're mixing and matching, but you're going in a logical progression. You're not going backwards. You're not doing dynamic to static. You're working the model up as if you're using the whole continuum in one day. So that's the logic behind it. And it just follows that progression. And then you're ready to go when you get into the meat and potatoes, which is the high speed stuff. So Wendy, I know that this is a passion of yours with the Max Power. I love it too. It's a great way to train. I think everyone should be encouraged to continue to look towards getting better at this phase of training and the progressions that lead up to it. So some key takeaways. Shocker that we talk about follow the OPT model. I think we've covered that many different ways and times throughout today's podcast. So hopefully that's a key takeaway. You're like, yep, this is why I did it. This is why I took NASM. And then have a purpose for each phase, right? We know that you went through those purpose and those specific outcomes when you took your course. Revisit those every so often and just put them up there in your mind so you know why you're doing something. And Max Power is highly recommended for athletes or the athletic population within a level that they can control. That's obviously a great point. Other people can do it if they're not an elite athlete. It's going to look a lot different. That's all. And then without a doubt, know when to recover and when to push. All right. You're not going to do 50 weeks a year of max power training. It wasn't designed for that. And that is not the intended purpose. So,
And if you go through the PES text, you're going to see it says try to maximize it at 4 weeks or less. And there's a purpose because it is taking everything that you've got and putting it out there when you're in the gym and working on this particular phase for sure.
Great stuff.
So if you guys have any questions or comments, we're live, so go ahead and put them in the chat box over here, and Marty and I will answer it if it comes in the next couple of minutes. However, if you listen to this after the fact and you have questions for me, you can find me on Instagram at wendy.batts13, or you can always email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org.
And my info is right here. So Instagram, dr.martymiller72, and emails marty.miller@nasm.org. So Wendy, thanks for putting this one together, and thanks for all your expertise in this area, sharing that knowledge. And for those of you that joined us, we will always be appreciative to you taking the time out of your schedule. And then we look forward to seeing you next week on the Master Instructor Roundtable.